They said she was cursed the day the village midwife shook her head and whispered the word Barren. And from that moment, Aisha's life stopped belonging to her. In a world where a woman's worth was measured by the children she bore, her empty womb became a public verdict, a silent shame that followed her through every dusty street and lowered gaze. Her parents, already drowning in poverty, began to see her not as a daughter but as a burden they could no longer carry. And each night her mother cried not out of love but fear of mouths to feed and neighbors who whispered cruelty like prayer. Aisha was gentle, obedient, kind beyond measure, yet none of it mattered because kindness could not produce sons. When the traveling trader came through town offering coin for women deemed unwanted, her father hesitated, only long enough to count the silver. He did not look at her when he agreed. She was sold not because she was evil or broken, but because she could not give life. As she was led away, barefoot and silent, she realized something more painful than betrayal. No one fought for her. The road was long, the sun unforgiving, and her heart numb as she was taken westward to a frontier town where men were lonely and women were scarce. She expected cruelty, perhaps a hard-handed husband who would remind her daily of her failure. But fate had a different kind of loneliness waiting. The cowboy who chose her stood apart from the others, tall and quiet with eyes that looked older than his years. He had 5 children clinging to his legs, his coat worn thin, his hands calloused not just by labor but by grief. He did not ask about her womb. He did not inspect her like property. He simply said, "They need a mother, and I need someone who won't run." That night, as Aisha lay awake under a leaking roof listening to children breathe in uneasy sleep, she realized this was not a purchase, it was a gamble between 2 broken futures. And as the wind howled outside like judgment itself, something fragile but dangerous began to grow inside her heart. Hope. If you're drawn into stories of pain turning into purpose, stay with us. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is only the beginning. Life with the cowboy was not gentle, but it was honest. And honesty was something Aisha had never been given before. His name was Caleb, and grief lived in his silence like a second shadow, following him through the barn, the fields, the long dinners eaten without laughter. His wife had died birthing their youngest, leaving behind 5 children who learned early that crying did not bring her back. They did not trust Aisha at first. To them, she was another stranger who might disappear, another promise too fragile to hold. The eldest boy watched her like a guard dog, suspicious of every kindness, while the youngest cried at night for a mother whose face was already fading. Aisha worked without complaint, her hands blistering, her back aching, her heart stretching in ways she didn't know were possible. She learned each child's fear, each hunger, each wound that went deeper than scraped knees. She sang softly while cooking, not because she was happy, but because the children needed sound to fill the emptiness. Slowly, resistance turned into reliance and reliance into love. Caleb noticed in silence. He saw the way the children leaned toward her warmth, how the house felt less haunted, how laughter, rare and fragile, began to return. Yet he kept his distance, afraid to want what life had already stolen from him once. One night, when sickness swept through the children like a storm, Aisha did not sleep for 3 days, holding fevered bodies, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone heard. When the danger passed, Caleb found her collapsed on the floor, exhausted but smiling because the children lived. Something broke open in him then, not grief but gratitude. The town, however, was less kind. Whispers followed her again, cruel and sharp, reminding her she was not a real woman, that no matter how many children she raised, none carried her blood. Aisha heard them, felt them cut, but she stood taller because these children carried her heart. When Caleb defended her publicly, choosing her dignity over his reputation, she realized love was not always loud declarations. It was protection, presence, and choice. That winter, as snow buried the land and food ran scarce, Aisha gave up her portions without telling anyone, growing weaker while the children grew stronger. It was only when Caleb confronted her that she confessed she did not know how long she would be allowed to stay happy before the world took it away again. He held her then, not as property, not as a favor, but as a woman whose worth had been proven in fire. And if this story is touching something deep inside you, subscribe now, because what happens next will change everything. The miracle, when it came, arrived quietly, almost afraid to be noticed, as if even hope had learned caution in Aisha's life. It began with exhaustion she could not explain, with mornings that made her dizzy and nights filled with strange dreams. When the traveling doctor finally confirmed it, his voice shook more than hers. She was with child. For days she said nothing, terrified that joy would anger fate, terrified that if she spoke the words aloud, they would disappear like everything else she had loved. When she finally told Caleb, he did not speak. He simply fell to his knees and cried, like a man who had survived too much to believe in mercy. The children celebrated in confusion and delight, touching her stomach as if it were sacred ground, already calling the baby theirs. News traveled fast, and the same village that once sold her now whispered a different word, blessed. But redemption is not owed applause. It is owed truth. When her parents arrived, driven by shame and desperation, Aisha faced them not with anger but with calm strength. She did not ask for apologies. She did not beg for love. She simply showed them the life she had built after they gave her away. When labor came, it was long and brutal, echoing the pain that had shaped her entire existence. But when her child finally cried, it was as if the universe itself had exhaled. She held her baby, tears falling freely, knowing this child was not proof of her worth but a gift, not a verdict. Caleb stood beside her, not as a savior but as a partner, and the children crowded close. A family forged not by blood alone but by choice, sacrifice, and love. Years later, people would tell the story wrong, saying she was rewarded for patience, as if suffering were currency. But the truth was deeper. Aisha was never barren. She was planted in the wrong soil. And when she was finally placed where love was not conditional, she flourished beyond anyone's imagination. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in second chances, subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because stories like this remind us that even the most broken beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings.